Brother Steve will be speaking for us this morning. He's asked that we read 1 Kings chapter 19, first 18 verses. And while we read that, we'll keep in mind his title, The 7,000. 1 Kings chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and with all how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the God do to me and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him, and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baked in coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights, and unto Horeb, the mount of God. And he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and said unto him, What dost thou here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord of God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, and thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. The Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle, went out, and stood in the entering of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him, and said, What dost thou here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain the prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Maholah shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael thou shalt Jehu slay, and him that escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him.
These are exciting times that we're living in. Technology has brought the world to our fingertips. Within a short time, we have the ability to see almost anything that is happening in the world around us. From hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, to shootings, terrorist attacks, and wars. Our Facebook pages let us know what is happening in the lives of people that we know. We see the vacation post. We know when they go out to eat at the local restaurant. We know when they get a new dog or go to a football game, or if they're just having a bad day. If we want to go somewhere, our phones give us instant directions. We can see a satellite view of almost any place around us. We can get our emails and pay our bills while hiking in the woods. We have access to almost anything we want to know just by speaking a question into our phone. And yet, with all this technology and the information that is available to us, it seems that the world is further away from religion. Many churches have seen a decline in members, and the younger generation just doesn't have the desire to read the Bible or to think about the sacrifice of Christ. They find churches boring, uninteresting. They may even claim to have a belief that there is some sort of higher power out there, but they never search it out. I can understand why people are so adverse to religion. The Bible can be harsh and unforgiving. For example, it tells us that our heart is deceitful and wicked. In recent years, the way we parent our children has changed. It has been found that by using positive reinforcement, that can lead to pretty good results. So instead of telling our kids how bad they are and threatening discipline on them, we highlight their good traits and reward them for good behavior. Spanking a child is frowned on. Instead, we give them a timeout. But the Bible doesn't give us a timeout for bad behavior. Instead, it threatens judgment and fiery indignation. It promises death without mercy. We struggle to do the commandments. And if there was ever a time when we might actually succeed at keeping the commandments, Jesus says, when you've done everything commanded of you, then you should say, you are unworthy servants, because you've only done your duty. And why would we even make the attempt to be righteous? The Bible says there is no righteous, not even one. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. All these things make us feel that it is impossible to be perfect. They make us feel that it's impossible to please God. When we think of the prophets of Baal, we think of groups of wicked men, very wicked men. From our point, Jezebel was a very terrifying person. But if you were a prophet of Baal, you'd probably think that she was a pretty cool leader. In fact, the whole worshiping of Baal could actually be very appealing. You're worshiping a storm god, a rider of the clouds that gives rain to the earth and stability to the physical world. The worship involved magic and rituals and things that cause pleasure. Compared to worshiping Yahweh, Baal worship was easier, enjoyable, and seemed to be more satisfying to the worshipers. Baal worship was a positive in many people's life. And these men and women who worship Baal, they seem like decent people. They were actually very pleasant to be around. Baal worship gave them purpose and hope. So when Elijah comes around and by God's power directly challenges Baal by causing it not to rain for 3 years, Elijah's the bad guy. Elijah's way is no fun. Well, it's not much different today. The way of the Bible is no fun. The Bible is the bad guy. The Bible is wrong. The Bible needs to be destroyed. This attitude about the Bible can be very discouraging for us to hear. But during these last days, the Bible teaching is in direct conflict with the lifestyle of the world. And because technology has brought the world closer together, technology has really highlighted this conflict to the point where many want nothing to do with the Bible or its teachings. Jezebel is no longer alive. But today, there are many modern-day Jezebels in the world around us. And these Jezebels are mad. They're so angry, and they will stop at nothing to destroy the Bible and its teachings. Doesn't matter if the Bible's true or not. It doesn't really matter, or it didn't really matter then that Elijah's God showed himself to be true by raining fire from heaven that burnt up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and the water. And it doesn't matter today that the prophecies in the Bible are coming to pass with alarming accuracy. It doesn't matter because Jezebel is more interested in preserving her lifestyle than she is worshiping the one true God. So what happens now is important for us to learn from. Elijah. This man who it's obvious to all God was working through him. This man who helped demonstrate that Baal was false. This man who by prayer brought down fire from heaven. This man of God became afraid. He was so afraid that he ran for his life. He just wanted to die. He wanted it to be all over. He felt like a failure. This is important for us to learn from because it's very easy for us to feel the same way. We can become so frustrated by the things around us that we just want to die. We can become so afraid of the hatred of men that we run and hide. We can feel that we're only a failure and that worshiping God is impossible. Well, this all has to do with perspective. Perspective is a particular way of considering something. And our perspective can change dramatically depending on the depth and the distance in which we view something. So step back and think about the trees around us. Well, this is the time of year where the leaves begin to change color and people come from miles around to look at the trees. They see browns and yellows and oranges and reds. What a beautiful thing that God created. Now focus in on a single tree. A single tree can be beautiful and majestic with its branches reaching up towards heaven. It can be strong and solid, unshaken by the wind. Now focus a little bit closer on the branches. What do you see? Well, you see chaos. You see some branches going this way, you see some branches going that way. Some branches are short, some branches are long, some look healthy, some look weak, some have knots and blemishes on them. The closer we zoom in, we would wonder if there could be any beauty to it at all. It seems impossible that those branches could ever amount to anything. And yet, that is the base that God uses, and He has taken that impossibleness and turned it into something absolutely breathtaking and beautiful when we step back and we look at it. But it's all about perspective. And we can see it in other things. Step back and look at the sky. You'll see white clouds dancing in the clear blue sky. The clouds seem to come to life as we look at them, and the wind moves them across the face of the sky. It can be breathtaking to behold. Now focus closer onto a single cloud. You will see it change its shape as it moves across the sky. It may look like a boat, or a dog, or a cat. You'll see faces, shapes, and objects. Now zoom closer, and what will you see? There's nothing but mist and white. There's no shape or beauty, nothing to be desired. It would seem impossible that this mist could ever be turned into anything of beauty, and yet this is the base that God uses, and He has taken the impossible and turned it into something of absolute beauty when you step back and look at it. But it's all about perspective. We live close to some amazing mountain peaks. Step back and look at these mountain peaks. They're so beautiful and majestic. Some have tops that are bare. Some have tops that are covered with snow. Now focus in on a single peak. You will see its rocks shine in the sun as it reaches towards heaven. It's beautiful to behold. Now zoom in closer. And what do you see? There's nothing but stone and dirt, and it's dry, rocky. It would seem impossible from this dust that anything of beauty could be created. And yet this is the base that God uses, and He's taken the impossible and turned it into a thing of beauty that we take pictures of and we admire all our lives. Well, this is the perspective that Elijah was missing, and we can miss it too. And the disciples wondered the same thing. It seemed to them that the path to the kingdom was just too rigid. Just when they thought they understood what they needed to do, Jesus would add something else to the list. And they were overwhelmed by it. And they wondered who in the world could ever be saved. It's just impossible. But Jesus had the right perspective, and He acknowledged, well, with men it is impossible. It's impossible for us to even see how God could take people like us, people with our faults, our shortcomings, and turn us into a thing of beauty. We could never accomplish it on our own. In all history, only one person born accomplished it. So who are we to think that we could? But Jesus said what's impossible with men is possible with God. And so there we find Elijah. He had spent 40 days traveling in the wilderness, afraid, feeling like a failure. He came to the mountain of God, and God asked him, "What's up?" Elijah answers, "Things are a mess in Israel. No one's worshiping you. Any good person has been killed or is now dead, and now they're just trying to kill me." At first glance at the answer God gives him, it would appear that God just brushes off the way Elijah was feeling and more or less just tells him to get off his butt and get back to work. But God spent some time trying to give Elijah perspective. I don't know what there is about a really good thunderstorm. But as long as I'm in a safe place, I love listening to the sound of thunder and seeing the lightning fall from the sky. When it shakes the house, it can be frightening. There is something about it that makes me think of the power of God. It reminds me that He is there. But the truth is, He's always there, even on a clear sunny day with no wind. Sometimes we may want Him to pour out His fury on the earth, to wake up the people around us. We want Him to put an end to this time when everyone just goes around and does their own thing, and no one seems to care about God. We want Him to rise up and shake the earth. We want Him to make Himself known, and we want Him to put an end to the wicked. But when day after day passes and nothing seems to change in the world around, and it just seems to be getting further and further away from God, we can begin to think that He's just not there. But God showed Elijah, and He's showing us, He is very much around. Sometimes also quietly in the background. Things are happening. People are being made ready. And even though Elijah could not see it, even though he thought he was the only one left, God told him there's 7,000. There's 7,000 men and women who have not bowed to Baal. Elijah, you're not a failure. And you're not alone in the world after all. There is a remnant. When Paul wrote to the Romans, he wrote about this moment in time when Elijah was comforted by God. It was important for Elijah to understand that there's a remnant out there. And it was also important for the ecclesia in Rome to understand that they too were not alone. God was at work. And even though it may not have seemed that way, Paul told them there was a remnant alive in that day. And I believe the same is true today. There is a remnant of people out there. People we know, people we may not know, but people who serve the living God. Now, when we think of the faithful, we think of well-known men like Abraham, Noah, Job, and Daniel. But the faithful includes so many more men and women. We don't know the names of the 7,000 people. We don't know their faces. We don't know where they lived. We don't know what they did for work. Did they feel that they were all alone? Were they depressed about the world around them? Did they feel like a failure? What we do know about these men and women is that they believed in the one true God and they refused to worship any other god. They weren't out to make a name for themselves. They lived simple, humble lives, believing and trusting in God. Everyone wants to find their place in the world. We all want to know how we fit in. Well, your place is where you're at. And it's the little things you say and do that matter. These are things that maybe no one else in the world knows about. But your kind acts and deeds do not go unnoticed. Your faith and trust in God does not go unnoticed. God notices. But let's be honest with ourselves. When we really think about it, none of us feels worthy. None of us feels like we've kept the commandments. none of us feels like we're part of that remnant. Elijah fled to the mountain of God because he knew he needed God. He was nothing without God. And we also need God in order to rise up above our own feelings of failure and unworthiness. Remember the branches on the tree? Well, the Bible likens us to branches on a tree. Look close at any of us, and you may wonder what God sees in us. But it doesn't stop with the branches. And in order to become a thing of beauty, the Bible tells us we need to be grafted into Christ. Christ is the tree, and this is not an option. There's no substitute. This is a necessity. Without Christ, we cannot be saved. The branch will die without the tree, and we will die unless we become part of Christ. Remember the mist in the cloud that didn't have any form or appearance? Well, Christ is like that mist. There's nothing about him that we would have desired. Christ would be nothing without the Spirit of God. But you take that mist and you add the Spirit of God to it, and now he became beauty. This beauty is the water and the Spirit that we need to enter the kingdom of God. In the same way, Christ would be nothing without the Spirit of God. We also will be nothing without the Spirit of God. And remember the rocks on the mountain. Well, that represents the church. On our own, we're weak. But by assembling together as brethren of Christ, we become strong as a rock and a light that shines from the mountaintops, reflecting the glory of God. Put all your fears aside. Do not think that you're impossible to save. Just step back and see God at work. And when you're feeling a bit lonely, when you think God has abandoned you and is not around, when you're tired of listening to the sound of your tears, when you think that the best of your years have gone by, and when you feel terrified about the things that are happening in the world around you, when you feel like you're just falling apart, then step back and look. God is here. He is always here.